So, from the time I turned 18 and I was officially recognized as an adult in the state of California, I was not legally allowed to own the most common firearm used for self defense, a handgun. Now, unfortunately, this isn't just a California thing, it actually applies to all 50 states in the US, and it all stems all the way back to the Gun Control Act of 1968, a federal law that introduced a whole lot of new firearm regulations. One of those was a ban on FFLs, which, for those who don't know, are licensed gun dealers like your local gun shop from selling handguns to anyone under 21. The reason behind this came from multiple high-profile assassinations at the time, like JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, and most notably Robert F. Kennedy, who was killed with a .22 revolver. In response, Congress pushed to limit the access of handguns since they were considered far more dangerous given how easy they are to conceal and how often they were being used in violent crimes, which FBI data at the time showed a noticeable increase in firearm-related deaths involving handguns. Now, maturity levels also played a big role. The argument was that younger adults were far more likely to act reckless and have poor impulsive control, which lined up with the broader belief that full maturity didn't really kick in until around the age of 21, where people were thought to have better emotional control. All that coming together and ultimately leading to set the minimum age to purchase a handgun to 21. Now, why do I give a shit whether or not 18 and 20-year-olds can buy handguns? I mean, I'm of age now, I can buy whatever the hell I want, so why does this still bother me? Well, I'm passionate about this topic mainly because I remember being that 18-year-old not too long ago and being told, no, you can't have that. Because in the eyes of the law, I was still considered an immature child that was not responsible enough to be purchasing a handgun from a licensed dealer. And of course, that pissed me off because at the time I was responsible enough to wake up every day and go to work. I was responsible enough to pay my taxes on time. I was mature enough to be called up for jury duty, and I was mature enough to vote and, of course, join the military. So while I was trusted to handle what I considered at the time adult priorities, when it came to buying a handgun, I was still looked as an irresponsible, immature child. Which, let's talk about maturity real quick. Now, I agree, some 18 and 20-year-olds are completely retarded and immature, who scroll mindlessly on a miniature screen for hours on end and probably drink and smoke like idiots till they get high or black out. But one thing I quickly realized working at warehouse jobs at a young age and being alongside all different types of age groups is that there's also retarded and immature people amongst much older age groups, which is my main issue with defining maturity with age, because it's far more complex than that since there's psychological and social maturity that vary from person to person. So to lump three complete different age groups into one box and label them all as immature and irresponsible doesn't quite sit well with me. Now, thanks to the Supreme Court's decision in Bruin, which requires gun laws to align with historic tradition of firearms, the issue is finally being challenged. Organizations like FPC and others like Second Amendment Foundation have filed a lawsuit under Reeves v. ATF, pushing back against the federal law that bans young adults under the age of 21 from purchasing handguns from licensed dealers. Now, throughout the case, the ATF has argued that the Founding Fathers did have age requirements for certain things, like marriage, owning land, or entering contracts that were typically set at 21, which they considered the age of full adulthood. Now, that still wasn't any solid historical evidence brought from the founding era that supported the age restriction on owning firearms. However, what did exist and was brought up was the Militia Act of 1792, which required all body citizens ages 16 and up to enroll in state militias, which they required them to provide their own weapons. Now, they try to argue that the militia was like the military, heavily, supervised with strict rules about who could have access to guns. But if you know your history, you know that the militia isn't like the military or some government-controlled force. It's made up of everyday citizens, people like you and me, who were trained and equipped to defend against foreign or domestic threats, which alone proves young adults did own and have access to their own firearms when joining the militia. Now, lastly, they try to bring up the US v. Rahimi case, where the court found historical analogs in English and earlier American law that allowed disarming of individuals who posed a clear threat to others. Now, again, that argument didn't hold up because Reeves v. ATF wasn't challenging the restriction on people who were considered dangerous. It was challenging the federal ban that stopped law-abiding 18 to 20-year-olds from buying handguns from licensed dealers. And at the end, the Fifth Circuit finally decided to strike down the ban, ruling it unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. So, does that mean young adults ages 18 to 20 and states under the Fifth Circuit can now legally buy handguns from FFLs? Legally, at the state level, yes, they should be able to. But here's the problem. From what I've been hearing, FFLs still aren't selling to anyone under 21. Why? Because even though the Fifth Circuit ruled against the ban, it's still technically illegal under federal law. And because of that, dealers don't want to risk losing their license. And look, as much as I hate hearing that, I get it. These people are just trying to do their jobs. They're not trying to lose their business. So, from what I understand, it is still illegal for any licensed dealer to sell a handgun to anyone under the age of 21, which really sucks, especially if you're someone who cares about their personal safety and wants to take responsibility for it, and you're being denied access to one of the most common tools used for self-defense. Not to mention, handguns are also one of the hardest firearms to learn to shoot properly. So, early exposure and training, I believe, would really help. That's why I always tell people, even if you can't legally buy one yet from a licensed dealer or your state doesn't allow private party transfers of handguns, your best option is to get reps at the range with handguns owned/rented by family or friends. Now, I know not everyone has people around them who can take them to the range to rent or shoot their firearms, so another option I tried while waiting to turn 21 was picking up the airsoft version of the handgun I planned to own/carry one day, which for me was a Glock 19. So I ended up getting a replica version of it with full blowback action, which to this day I still have. And what's cool about these is that a lot of these airsoft replicas nowadays are officially licensed by the actual firearm manufacturer, so they're nearly identical in feel and dimension, which means you can use actual holsters to work on your draw and run drills. Now, obviously, I know airsoft doesn't replicate actual recoil, not even with the blowback action models, but that's not really the point. The goal is to build solid habits in a safe way, especially when you're first starting off and you're waiting until you can legally get your hands on the real thing. So that's all I gotta say. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing some CCW drills, make sure to check out my Instagram at ShotTheWicked. Also, if you want to get in contact with me, that's a great place. But other than that, hope you guys have a good weekend. Stay safe and God bless.